Okay, so quick presentation on the science of strength training. So this is a real basic overview, and this is actually quite advanced, guys. So I've gone in maybe a little bit heavy on you, but I've done my master's degree. So I've done an undergraduate degree and I've done a master's degree in strength and conditioning science, and don't think that, you know, by taking PE or by going down this road it's going to be all playing sport and having fun. There's quite a lot of science involved, and you've got to have your maths on point, and you've got to have your scientific understanding on point. And if you do, then the chances of you having a dream job or a dream career working with high level athletes is greatly increased. And, you know, also it can help with your own understanding of your own training. So if you have any kind of ambitions to become a sports person, maybe full time or one day get paid for it, which I've been a professional sports person myself. It is good time. It's good job to have, but it's still a job. Then understanding these scientific principles will pay dividends for your future. So if you can learn this now, you will be ahead of the game when you get into sort of undergraduate and whatnot level. So let's see what we can do today. Let's see if we can jumpstart and get ahead of the game on this one. So let's just have a quick overview of some of the scientific principles. So in its real basic element, what we're trying to do is overload the muscles to produce a training stimulus. So by increasing the weight on the bar or by putting muscles under more and more stress over time, we will what we call elicit a training stimulus. So we know that within certain parameters, that if we continue to sprint a little bit faster or lift a little bit more weight over time, our muscles and our bodies are going to react, and our brain, or what we call a neuromuscular pathway, so the brain's ability to talk to the muscles, will improve over time, and the result of that will be we get stronger, we get faster, or we basically elicit a training response depending on what we're training. So we need to understand the four principles of training. Okay, one being progressive overload. Now that is just essentially applying more force to the muscles to stimulate a training response, which we just spoke about. Okay, now you can do that by changing sets, changing repetitions, changing volume, changing resistance. So volume being the amount of, for example, weight you lifted, or volume might be, say from a perspective of swimming, might be the amount of 100 meter sprints you swim in any one session. Resistance obviously can be the weight loaded on a barbell, for example. Sets and reps obviously are just the amount of sets you do and the repetitions of that in which you do. So sets and reps can even relate to something like kicking practice in rugby or football. Specificity. So specificity is the adaptation or change in physical fitness specific to the type of training undertaken. Now, this is where we get a little bit sciencey. You have to train for the adaptation you're looking to achieve, and we'll talk about what we call a force velocity curve a little bit later. But basically, the idea of specificity is that the one way I try to explain it is, you've got to train fast to be fast, okay? By doing long, slow, steady running, that might not necessarily be the best way to train for, say, a football match, because football, as we know now, is essentially a game made up of short sprints. Hockey, same example. While there is an underlying sort of steady state, in hockey, you're usually either walking or you're probably sprinting. We're certainly running very fast. So we've got to train for the adaptations we're looking to elicit in the body. Okay, individualization. So every person is different, and training must reflect that. So that's obvious. I would say that probably goes hand in hand with life. But what we mean there really is that everybody has a different genetic makeup. Everyone's going to be better at certain facets of training. Some people might be better in sort of absolute strength. Some people might be better with speed and power. Some people might be more agile, etc. So what we have to do is we can't just have what we call a cookie cutter program. So I can't give everyone in the class the same training program and expect to elicit the same training response. So some people will if I did a load of really heavy strength training, some people would adapt to that really well, and just some people wouldn't, just because of the way, you know, we're all made up genetically differently. So for a coach's perspective, what you need to do is be able to look at a team or a group of people and say, well, each person within that group is going to be slightly different, so I can expect different adaptations or different benefits for each person, depending on the program or depending on the training that I give them. Reversibility, use it or lose it. So you can't just train once and expect to keep those kind of gains forever, keep those results forever. You're going to need to continually practice. You're going to need to continually overload the body, because the body will reverse and it will go back to where it was before, essentially. So if you don't continue to walk the path, you will lose the pathway, if you like. So reversibility is a big one. Use it or lose it. Okay, let's get into it. See how we get on with this. So understanding some of the key science in strength, and we're going to go into a little bit on formulas and numbers here. So, but hopefully it's relative, so won't be too boring. I've put these pictures up. These pictures are very specific as well. We've got the lady on the right doing some form of left. See, get your left and right first as well, guys, if you can. We've got the lady on the left doing some form of mathematical formula. And the idea is that she's going to then, top right, she's going to kind of apply that in the weight room or in the training room. And bottom right, that is going to transfer over to a sporting performance. Okay, so this is how it works. If you understand the key scientific principles, you can apply them to training and you can elicit, a training response, which I'm guessing in the bottom right-hand corner is our friend here running faster. Okay, so yeah, that's just a little visual representation for you. Force equals mass times acceleration. You might have heard this in your physics lessons before. I'm sure you would have. But it's basically if we can apply more force, and we can, to apply more force, we need to change one part of that equation. So force equals mass times acceleration. We need to either improve the mass or improve the acceleration to elicit what we would call more force or more strength. Always go back to F equals ma. Okay, if you understand that, you're halfway there. So this is the real sciencey bit, if you like, the force velocity curve. Now, it's basically a representation of the relationship between force and velocity. So force being sort of, think of it almost like absolute strength, the amount of strength we can put through a body, and it's represented on here by maximum strength being 1 RM. That's your absolute strength. So 1 repetition max is literally the most amount of force you can apply for 1 repetition, and the maximum speed that you can apply, which will be down the bottom of the curve, because obviously you're not going to be able to move a really heavy weight particularly quickly. So the lower down that curve you go, the faster you can expect to work. But obviously we know F equals ma, so we need to work both ends of this curve. We need to work all the way through this curve, and it's represented by percentages of your repetition maximum. So percentages of your absolute strength. It's the best way, and the most research has been done sort of on this, and we've come up with this sort of force velocity curve. And if you can understand the relationship, the influences on performance, you can understand exercise selection. So you can look at an athlete and decide what part of that curve they probably need to work on. So a gymnast, for example, a young gymnast might be quite sort of heavily sort of down the bottom of that curve, so they might be incredibly fast, incredibly powerful, but don't have that huge amount of maximum strength. So if we're looking to improve their performance, if they're very good down the bottom of the curve, the chances are we probably need to do some higher strength work, so more at the top of that curve. So we need to get the force up, or in this case it would be the mass. So the mass we put on a barbell, for example, to make them work the upper end of that curve. And if we had, say, we had a really sort of big scrum, prop, for example, we know that on this curve they're probably going to be a little bit more towards the maximum strength end. They might be very, 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 very strong, very, very powerful, but maybe a bit slow. So in order to increase their force, or in order to increase the force they can exert in the scrum, maybe we need to work a little bit more on speed work. Because again, we go back to that initial F equals MA. And if we can understand that, then we can manipulate the exercise selection, we can manipulate how we train someone. And that is incredibly important, because the practical application is, if you can understand that force velocity curve, and it really does come down to that, if you can understand that force velocity curve, then you can rule the athletic world, because it all comes down to what we spoke about before, which is power being the key determinant of performance in most sports. 99.9% of sports will be about optimizing an athlete's power. And if you can do that, then, and you understand how that works on paper and in the training room, out in the field, in the weight room, then you will rule the athletic world. I'm not sure I understand. Okay, that's me watch. Athletes should typically train along the force velocity curve. So what you'll find is that without kind of knowing it, you're probably training all the way down that curve at sort of various different times in your training life, especially as you get older and you get more used to strength training and some of these other bits and pieces. Where you train along that curve will depend on a couple of things. So, your training age. And what that means, your training age is not your chronological age, okay? Your training age is how long you've been training for. So if you started, weightlifting at, say, 12 or 13, your training age is a lot older than, say, someone that started weight training at 20. Yeah, so actually your training age, their training age is very young, your training age is relatively old. So always take that into account. Always take that as a previous experience of the athletes you're working with, the people you're working with. Individual strengths and weaknesses. Again, you being able to see where someone's strengths are and where weaknesses are will mean that you can, manipulate those in the training setting and in the weight room, and that will, eventually increase their performance if you understand, that curve. Training objectives as well. Well, in terms of the force velocity curve, say we had a powerlifter, for example, and really then they don't need to work much down the bottom of that curve, because they're only really worried about absolute strength. So it'll be much more on the top end of that curve. So understanding what their training objectives are and what their sport involves, we will be able to work along that curve, and again pick the right exercises for them to do. The sport and position of the athlete, so that comes down to, again, if we take rugby, for example, you would train a prop very differently to the way you would train, say, a winger. Time of year or season stage of the macro cycle. So macro cycle means just a training cycle. So, basically the time of the season or time of the year. So would you have someone training really, really hard, really heavy weights, a week out from leading to one of the biggest competitions in the year calendar? Then, hopefully not. Even you intuitively would know that. So really this is about what we call periodization, and periodization is the skill or the programming, if you like, of a training cycle, and that cycle would be a year, it could be 10 years. For example, in the Olympics, they often do 4-year training cycles, because the Olympics happen every 4 years, and they want to peak or come to the top of their game at the end of that cycle. So your training cycle will reflect that. Your training should reflect those cycles as well. But yeah, hopefully that's a good quick overview of the science behind strength and conditioning. And like I say, if you can understand that force velocity curve, and you can understand science and scientific principles, and you can get your maths on point, then you can rule the athletic world, and you can take some of this stuff into your own training, and you can apply it to everyone from, your mum and dad, or your brothers, sisters, whoever, or your mates, to high level athletes. I'm talking like high level. I'm talking like Olympic level athletes. Understand that, rule the athletic world. Really important, guys. Hopefully that wasn't too dry, and good luck with it all.